working through the trauma, to be honest with you, it really depends on how well the person who had the affair is being a healer, if they're going to work, how successfully they work through the trauma. Because that person who's been betrayed needs honesty, they need answers, they need closure on this, and they want it resolved.
Right.
But these things that we're talking about with the trauma, it keeps people stuck in a way where you can't think about anything but that.
You're listening to Healing Broken Trust podcast with Brad and Morgan Robinson, where we talk about healing from affairs, infidelity, trust, and cheating in your relationship from the perspective of a professional marriage therapist and affair recovery expert. If you're wanting to heal your relationship after infidelity, this is the podcast for you. And we're officially on episode number 18, and we're talking about the steps that you can take to recover from trauma. All right, so we've had this little mini 4-part series of trauma. We're at the 4th part, and we're talking about how to recover from this trauma. And if you haven't already, make sure to download episodes 15, 16, and 17, which are the first 3 parts to this trauma series. And also, episode 1 is really useful as well to kind of understand this in context of the 7 stages of the recovery process. So make sure to do that. It'll really help you a lot. And in addition to that, make sure you go to our website, healingbrokentrust.com/episode 18. That's the number 18. Download the free resources. They'll really help you to follow along and to really make the most out of this podcast so that you can really, really have the healing you deserve. So that's, again, healingbrokentrust.com/episode 18. Get those resources, make the most of them. Also, you can leave a message on our website as well. You can actually record an audio message. It can be totally anonymous if you want, and we do have weekly calls that you can join us on. When you go and download those free resources, we offer that as an option for you to take advantage of as well. You can ask those questions live, and if you leave a message, we do make sure to answer those questions on our weekly call, and you're welcome to join us. There's a promotion that we're running on there as well that you can take advantage of. I think it's $1 for the first month. So go to healingbrokentrust.com/episode 18, and let's get started. We'll start today's show with a listener question.
Okay.
This question comes from a gentleman in Broken Arrow, and he says, it was really helpful to learn that I'm not crazy, like I truly believed I was, since I've been acting so jumpy and suspicious all the time. Instead, learning about the symptoms and triggers in the last show helped me to realize situations that I need to avoid in order to get through this. But I would really like to know, how do you know you're recovering, and what is the process? We've been talking about the affair recovery process as discovery, ambiguity, trauma, meaning forgiveness.
We've been talking about those
stages,
those individual steps, but even with trauma, there's steps within trauma.
Yes, yeah.
And so that's what that person's wanting to know. So let's talk about that. We've talked about trauma in terms of symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. For many people, it's the most difficult thing they've ever experienced, feeling like discovering their spouse has betrayed them. And so dealing with that injured spouse's sense of trauma, it does follow an outline. Mm-hmm. And part of that, the first part, is outcry. In this period of outcry, there are strong, bewildering emotions. In the injured spouse, they feel stunned, overwhelmed, and probably have a strong sense of anger that their spouse who cheated and the affair partner. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that anger is really more rage. And so there's a strong sense of anger. They feel stunned. They're overwhelmed. A lot of bewildering emotions. Just people start feeling crazy. And it's just kind of this emotional roller coaster that starts. The next stage after outcry is avoidance and denial. An injured husband this guy probably feels numb. He has no desire, so he withdraws from people, avoids other people. During that time, the guy that emailed us, it's not uncommon for him to feel constricted emotionally. And usually you'll see people like this just stare blankly into space. As anyone in his shoes would, he really needs to be getting back to life as usual and engage in things that he did before he found out about the affair. Things that were important to him, like work, sports, kids, household responsibilities. But after the affair, what I've noticed is many people report feeling like their world is gray. at this time, many people feel physically and emotionally numb.
Yeah.
They may even find they have no desire to talk about it. And there's an outcry, then there's avoidance and denial, and people just want to really avoid it. They want to withdraw and avoid other people, and part of that is because they feel so much shame about it. They feel so humiliated. They feel so really stupid. Just they feel like gosh, I've been betrayed. This has happened to me, and here you are treating me like this.
Like I'm crazy.
Yeah, well, like I'm crazy, but just the way trauma works, it's almost like one of those things you don't know until you've lived through it, until you've gone.
Yeah.
I mean, you can read about it, you can hear me talk about it, and this is one of the things with betrayers is commonly they haven't been betrayed.
Right.
And so when they're trying to help their spouse heal and be a healer, a nurturer, supportive, they really become dismissive. And so they can get stuck in this avoidance and denial stage. And so a lot of people don't want to talk about it. They'll go numb. And when you go numb, you're blocking out even the positive emotions. And we've talked about that before.
And we're talking about trauma recovery. And we had a question about, how do you know you're recovering and what is the process?
Yeah. Well, as I was saying, there's the first part of this is there's an outcry, there's avoidance and denial, and then you have intrusive thoughts. Once the denial wears off, people who've been betrayed start experiencing intense emotions and thoughts related to the affair, and they begin to break into your awareness in your mind. Once that avoidance and denial wears off, you start thinking about the affair much, much more. It can become like an obsession at times. And so these thoughts are accompanied by physical arousal. The strong waves of thoughts and emotions, typically, they can wane for a time, giving people a feeling of normalcy. Okay, I'm not thinking about it. I'm not obsessing about it, but I also don't have these thoughts just popping into my head.
Maybe elaborate a little bit on the outcry part. What does that look like? Is it yelling? I mean, you talked about rage, but are they looking for help? Are they looking to their spouse?
Well, I think in some ways they're stunned. They're shocked. Just overwhelmed. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? It's almost like finding out somebody you love has cancer.
They're so confused. And
you're just shocked, and maybe you're upset and you cry. It's kind of a stunned feeling.
Yeah, kind of like the discovery process.
Yeah, but then also people just sometimes, that stunnedness wears off too, and they just get really angry. Sometimes when people feel obsessed and have intrusive thoughts, those are two different things. Obsessive is you have a hard time just stop thinking about it yourself. You can't put it down. And then intrusive thoughts are those times you're not thinking about it. There's all these little reminders, and we've talked about that.
Yeah.
And so, these intrusive thoughts will also make that person physically aroused. So our person that emailed us is probably experiencing some physical arousal. In a sense, these strong waves of thoughts and emotions, they can wane for a time, give you a feeling of normalcy, but they do return. And feeling aroused is common during the very early days and weeks of affair recovery. A lot of factors that go into how long it really takes to overcome an affair. But it lingers when betrayed spouses feel uncared for by their partner, by their spouse who had the affair. Or when they feel like they don't understand what drove their spouse to have the affair. So it's two different things. If you don't feel like you're really cared for, then it can wane. Or, it doesn't wane. It will continue. The intensity will continue. The intrusive thoughts will continue. And so if they don't feel cared for, they're going to continue to have intrusive and obsessive thoughts. Or if they feel like, gosh, I don't understand what drove you to have an affair. I don't understand your thought process. I don't understand why. Then it's going to continue to wane.
And that kind of goes into the meaning process we'll talk about.
Yeah, and I said continue to wane. I mean, it's not going to wane. It's not going to relax. It's going to continue to stay at that pattern of intensity and obsessiveness, and it's going to make you feel like you're crazy, but you're really not. This is a normal, predictable pattern that people experience after an affair, but they do feel crazy. But like I said, you're not crazy if you're experiencing this. And so many betrayed spouses, they'll experience hypervigilance during this time, and that's the feeling that causes them to snoop around and to investigate whether or not what their spouse is saying is true or not.
That's where he's talking about suspicion. He's very suspicious.
Yeah, and then so there's outcry, avoidance and denial, intrusive thoughts, and then there is the next part of this, working through the trauma. And I would say this is probably the longest period. Obviously, a lot of people I work with, outcry is very short, avoidance and denial is very short, intrusive thoughts can be a very long period for people, especially if they're struggling with understanding why, and if they're struggling with their spouse isn't really being there as a nurturer, as a healer, as being supportive. And if they feel like their spouse is continuing to lie to them, they're going to stay in that place. But working through the trauma, to be honest with you, it really depends on how well the person who had the affair is being a healer, if they're going to work, how successfully they work through the trauma. Because that person who's been betrayed needs honesty, they need answers, they need closure on this, and they want it resolved. But these things that we're talking about with the trauma, it keeps people stuck in a way where you can't think about anything but that. So let's talk about working through the trauma. When people start working through the trauma, they start feeling like, okay, the time has come where I need to work on this. And they're ready to face the reality of the affair. They've experienced all these thoughts, all these feelings. They talked it through with their spouse, and hopefully properly trained counselor who can help them through infidelity.
Which is very much different than just marriage counseling, standard marriage counseling.
Yeah, I would say infidelity, it's absolutely different.
Yeah. In what ways? Do you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, I'll say this. How infidelity recovery or affair recovery is different than marriage counseling. It falls under the banner of marriage counseling because you go to a marriage counselor for it. But it doesn't fit the mold of, I would say... just communication. Yeah, communication, improving our sex life. And sometimes people will come to marriage counseling, oh, we had an affair. We got to improve the marriage, and they think that's what they have to do. But really, what needs to be done is the injured spouse needs to understand this. The couple needs to understand this. The person who's had the affair needs to work through issues that drove them to this. Yeah, but it's really important to know that you still, even with affair recovery, you don't want to go to individual counseling to work on the marriage. No, so that's a bad idea. Even though you need to work out individual issues, the best way to do that is in marriage counseling, correct? Yeah, and of course, if you go to somebody individually, they may be somebody that works with a marriage counselor, but sometimes that's a bad idea to go to somebody individually just because a lot of people don't understand infidelity. So basically, you're working through the trauma. How you know you're working through it is you're ready to face it. There's false beliefs about yourself that you're correcting. You've grieved for the loss of the affair. You're starting to feel healthy again. A new commitment is made to the marriage with both spouses pledging to give 100% to the marriage, and you're at a place where you feel like the marriage is stronger than it was before. You feel like you can finally move on. And one of the things I like to emphasize is that if couples get stuck at a stage before it's completed, then these feelings and symptoms of PTSD will continue, and you just get stuck and you keep going back. But most couples who outline what we're talking about, and this is good news, I want to emphasize this. One of the things, if couples follow what we're talking about, they're going to feel like the first 3 months is going to be the hardest period of time. Yeah. But that's only if they're 100% honest. They're disclosing things. They're in regular therapy every week. They're getting the help they need. They're really jumping in, and both of them are tackling this and really trying to conquer this. After 3 months, not that I'm saying you're 100% recovered, but the trauma aspect, you feel like it's significantly diminished. Sometimes people get stuck. After a year of time, they still feel like they did when they first discovered, or like they did when in the early stages. And that's because both people are not both feet in, being completely out there and honest. Yeah, and there may be other factors at play, but we'll get to that in a second. But you're talking about the first 3 months. Yeah, so the first 3 months for a lot of couples is generally the crisis period. Kind of where the shock is the biggest. Yeah, well, it's the shock, it's the outcry, it's the intrusive thoughts. And they only get to that place where they feel like, not that the affair is behind them, not that it doesn't hurt. All I'm saying is that the first 3 months is generally the crisis period. For a lot of couples, if after about 6 months you're still feeling how you do after maybe the first month of working on things, there may be more at play. And part of that may be the betrayer is not really being there as a healer, not really being honest, not really being who they need to be. So, they're not being honest, so you can't heal. And every time there's a lie or something like that has to be corrected, or you're not being transparent, it's going to really hold back the injured spouse. But this is really important, though, too. Sometimes with being betrayed, what will happen is we get stuck because this is traumatic. It can activate old wounds as well. And so sometimes people who've been betrayed, you'll only know this if you're about 6 months in, you're not really getting anywhere. Yeah. And you're still feeling the same way, and your spouse is being there as a healer. They're trying to do everything right. At that time, it may be a good idea to look into individual therapy, and there's some really neat breakthroughs that have occurred in helping people overcome trauma. And so you want to find a good trauma therapist who can help you individually work through this. But I would only do that after trying to work through things as a couple first. Yeah. And that would be something that your marriage counselor could give you advice on, how to find somebody, who to go to. They may be working with somebody that they can refer you to. What you're saying is that's after 6
6 months of both people being completely out there and completely honest and completely transparent.
And I want to say that's a good question, because one of the things we get, a lot of times we will get people into our office who have done no work on the affair after a year, maybe 2 years, sometimes even 5 years. Then that person feels like, okay, I'm past this trauma aspect. But after having worked on it for 6 months and you still feel like you do it day one, you don't need to drop marriage counseling, because something's probably going on. Your marriage still needs help. But what you need to do is you need to seek individual help as well.
For trauma.
For maybe past hurts, past abuse, past deep wounds, past hurts that you experience from people. You need to get help for that
completely
individually.
Unrelated even sometimes to what happened with you and your spouse, right?
Yeah.
Parents or whatever.
Yeah. And let me say this. I want to get on to how people know they're recovering. I want to get to that in a second. But so the first 3 months is really the crisis period. A lot of people feel like the trauma, they're not past it, but they really feel like, okay, I'm a lot better than I was.
Progress.
I still have some bad days. I still have some dark days, but I feel like I'm a lot better. After 6 months, you feel like you're not getting better. You probably need to see an individual therapist, but do that only after talking with your marriage counselor about that, who's helping you work through infidelity. The first year anniversary, you should be feeling a lot better than you do, but that's going to be a rough time for people. And also, holidays are going to be rough for people. Valentine's Day, Christmas, holidays, family get-togethers, these times that should be really important, those are going to be rough. And it's going to take about a full 2 years, if everything goes right, for you to feel like you're past it. If there's a lot of lying in the beginning, a lot of deception going on, it's going to push you back at least 6 months in the affair recovery process. And so I want to get into that next question that you had, Morgan, on how to recover from an affair.
How do you know that you're recovering? What is that process? Yeah.
Okay. Basically, how you know you're recovering from the affair. Number one is you can recall or dismiss the affair at will. And what I mean by that is you're no longer experiencing intrusive memories of the affair. You're no longer experiencing nightmares, flashbacks, or these triggers. So it's something you choose to think about. It's not just this random, haphazard, flood of thoughts, an onslaught of thoughts. It's something that you choose to pick up and look at in your mind, and it's something that you choose to put down in your mind.
You have control.
You have control over it.
Okay.
The second is you can remember the affair with appropriately intense feelings. What I mean by that is you can look at it without getting really angry, but you can also look at it, and this is what people need to understand, you can also look at it where you're no longer detached or emotionally numb.
Interesting, yeah.
And what I mean by that is that's part of that avoidance and denial. And people can live there and feel like, oh, everything's okay, because they're in avoidance and denial.
They're grinning and bearing it.
Yeah. And one of the things that happens with trauma is people feel like they're watching somebody else's life. And so the third thing that you know how you're recovering as an individual from the trauma aspect is you can identify feelings about the affair that you're experiencing without becoming overwhelmed. You can identify your feelings about the affair without going numb or disassociating.
Which is something we talked about.
Yeah, and what I mean by disassociating is tuning others out by immersing yourself in solitary activities instead of withdrawing. So you can identify what you're feeling about the affair without becoming overwhelmed, going numb, or just withdrawing.
Going into your hidey hole and not coming out.
Yeah. And then a couple other things. You can predict feelings of depression and anxiety. That's how you know you're recovering. You can start predicting feelings of depression and anxiety coming. They may not be gone completely, but it's at least tolerable.
Wow, yeah.
And here's the other thing. You know you're recovering from an affair as the injured spouse when you can allow yourself to be around other people and have the emotional capacity for empathy.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So that's really important. And you know you're recovering when you have uncovered the meaning from the affair. And that's what our next show is going to be about. You are no longer obsessed and replay the information you have in your head. You're no longer just obsessed replaying things. It's not like a movie reel going on in your head. And you've been able to accept yourself and no longer practice self-blame. Many times people, when they've been betrayed, is they blame themselves for what's happened. And let me say this. It's important to understand that the affair recovery process for the injured spouse is different with every injured spouse. Sometimes there's other factors that go into this that make the trauma recovery portion longer. Past wounds are a factor that goes into this. Sexual abuse, being cheated on before, other relationship issues that you've had from within the marriage can make it more difficult. And are they being honest? That's something that you need to know. Are they helping you? And so those are factors that go into it. That's about it.
Well, that's fantastic. So much more self-aware, much more able to connect and less hurt.
Thanks for listening to Healing Broken Trust. If you like this episode, you can always get our show notes and more details and links to the resources we discussed at healingbrokentrust.com. Also, as long as you're online, head on over to healingbrokentrust.com/retreat for details on an upcoming one-on-one retreat with me. If you like us, please subscribe and leave a review for us on iTunes. As always, everything discussed on this podcast is either my opinion or Morgan's opinion and is not to be taken as relationship advice because I'm not your therapist, nor have I considered your personal situation as your therapist. This podcast is for your entertainment and education only, and I really do hope you've enjoyed it. See you until next time.